Oh, nee. Hello, everyone. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Okay,
Good afternoon.
is it okay if I just call the attendance while others are still joining? Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Para dire mag-ano.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Okay, so I'll start with section Mango. Please say present once your name is called. Zion, Akita. Zion.
Present.
Okay,
Present.
very good. Okay, very good. So today is 8/21. Mark, Vince, Araba,
Present.
Chad,
Present.
John David, Bantiles, John David, Justin Bihar, Justin, Lance Strobo,
Present.
Go, Dick Jono,
Present.
Ernest Von Hardillo,
Present.
Eugenio Malinaw, the fourth, Malinaw, Malinaw, Christian Marasigan, Christian Andre, Angel, Angel is a girl. Okay, Angel Cyril Monroy, Alexi Nicart,
Present.
Jade Ugale, Jade, Carl Vincent Panis, Carl Vincent, Yeshel Seso, San Emmanuel Solayaw, Mari Vincent Uy. Mari
Present
Vincent.
po. Present po,
Okay.
Mari Vincent.
Okay, thank you. So boys again, John David, are you there? John David, Bantiles, Bihar, Justin, Malinaw, Eugenio, Malinaw, Marasigan, Christian. Malinaw, is this Malinaw? Eugenio, present. Okay, Christian Marasigan, Monroy, Angel, Ogale, Jade, Seso, Yeshel, San Emmanuel. Okay, so go to the girls. Aberia, Erica,
Present po.
Lorraine, Abobo,
Present.
Zoe, Afable,
Present.
Gail, Alde, Alde, Ambil, Ana,
Present.
Amoyo, Raven,
Present.
Ampong, Joyce, Apura, Julia, Apura, Astakaan, Nash,
Present.
Astakaan, present, Nash, Astakaan, Nash, Colima,
Present.
Dator, John, Antoinette,
Present.
Jolola, De Los Santos, De Los Santos, Krishna. Okay, very good.
Present.
Jocelyn, Jolola,
Present po.
Docena, Aliana,
Present.
Julian, Gapate,
Present.
Julia, Alexis, Guevara, Antoinette, Lavado,
Present.
Maxine Marasigan. Maxine.
Present.
Debbie
Present po.
Benzon.
Present po, ma'am.
Isabella.
Present.
Francesca Promeda.
Present.
Jocelyn Faith. Jocelyn. Reese Sakmar.
Present.
Reese. Angelic
Present.
Suwal. Okay. Gail Alde, are you there? Gail Alde. Ampong Joyce. Astakaan Nash. Astakaan Nash. Guevara Julia. Guevara.
Present po.
Okay. Ha? Sino yon? Sino yon?
Julia po.
Julia Guevara?
Alex. Apo.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so we go to section sample. Abusejo, Joshua. Abusejo. John Joseph Anyosa.
Present po.
John Joseph, okay. John Edward Are. John Edward. Mark Kenneth
Present
Bulanadi.
po. Present po.
Earl Joseph Catalo. Delantar Earl. Earl. Labro and okay, so Earl is present. Labro Andre. Lilia Renz. Rosalejos Hans Lomar. Rosalejos. Samson Raydel.
Present po.
Traboco John Ray. Traboco. Okay. Princess Jane Abelia. Kiera Adamas.
Present.
Francine. Okay, thank you. Francine Alaya. Alaya
Present.
Francine.
Present.
Hannah.
Present.
Hannah Joseph. Denise
Present po,
Apura.
ma'am.
Joselle. Kay.
Present po.
Andrea Joy Beato. Andrea Joy. Mishka Cepeda. Mishka. Kiana Cassandra.
Present po.
Kiana. Jazzy Ray Doldolaya. Marian Dulfo. Marian.
Present po. Present.
Pristil Factor. Denisa May Fentes.
Present po.
Denisa. Hyacinth.
Present.
Tricia Nicole. Tricia. Okay, so nag-join pala. Angel Garcia.
Present po.
Leana Marian. Leana Gura. Gura.
Present.
Hazel Hilaria.
Present.
Hazel.
Present po, ma'am.
Shira Kirsty.
Present po.
Charnet Latoha.
Present po.
Giselle Mendoza.
Present po.
Jahara Montes.
Present po.
Pagayanan Isaiah.
Present po.
Pan Allison.
Present
Allison May. Yeza Nicole.
Present.
Nina Jenya.
Present, ma'am.
Ramirez. Charisse
Present.
Dorothy. Grace Love.
Present.
Present, ma'am. Present,
Ella.
ma'am. Grace Love.
Ella
Present
Torla.
po. Present.
Padilla. Jazil.
Present po.
Jazil, okay. So, are you ready for today's discussion? Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Be ready again with
Yes.
be ready with your notes, your pen. Be ready with your, not your notes actually. Be ready with your pen and paper for your note taking.
Yes po.
Kapalo is present. Kapalo. Rosalejas. Okay. So we'll be discussing today how cell membrane allows the entry and exit of substances. How the cell membrane or the plasma membrane allows the entry and exit of substances. Okay. We will start the topic with the different forms of transport. Slideshow. Okay, the forms of transport. Okay, so we have in the monitor two ways or two forms by which substances pass through the cell membrane. It can either be active or passive transport. Again, passive or active transport. Okay, so here below is a description of the passive and active transport. For the passive transport proceeds as diffusion from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. So, kung hain itong damo, makadtuhiya itong guti na area. Okay, so an area where substances is highly concentrated will go to an area where substances has a low concentration. Okay, so the flow of substances in passive transport is always from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. In the active transport, it proceeds against the concentration gradient and requires an input of energy. Okay, against the concentration gradient, meaning from low concentration of substances to high concentration of substances. It can either be, it can also be flow of substances from high to low, only that it will require energy for the transport or for transfer of materials. Okay, so that's an overview of the two forms of transport across the cell membrane. Okay, so we have it here. Substances in diffusion, so in this illustration, in the passive transport. So in this illustration, substances move from an area where concentration is high, kung hain itong damo, mapakadto hiya to an area where concentration is low, passing through the phospholipid bilayer. So in this illustration, the substances move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, passing through the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, so in another way of passive transport, here the substances again move from an area where concentration is high to an area where concentration is low, but substances pass through a channel protein. Okay, so the substances pass through a protein or a channel protein. Now, same thing is true with the other one. Okay? So the difference between the two is that here, the substances are transferred via facilitated diffusion. So there is a substance that facilitates the transport of materials from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So again, the protein here serves as, or the protein, okay, the protein facilitates the entry or exit of substances, or the protein facilitates the transport of materials. Whereas here, no protein molecule or no substance is needed for substances to be transported to a different area. Okay, now in the other illustration, an active transport, so in this illustration, the transport of materials uses energy. Okay, so energy is used so that materials will be transferred from an area to another area. So from outside of the cell, for the substances to be transferred to the inner side of the cell, energy is needed. Energy that is in the ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so we go now to the passive transport. Okay, now in passive transport, it does not require energy for the movement of molecules. Again, in passive transport, no energy is needed so that materials can be transferred from one place to another. Okay, so it does not require energy for the movement of molecules or for transfer of materials. Molecules move along the concentration gradient. Molecules move along the concentration gradient. Now, when we say concentration gradient, it simply means there is a difference of concentration. Let's say, for example, so there's a difference. So there's a difference in concentration. Example, dinikonta. Okay, so here, in this area, there might be plenty of molecules as compared to the opposite area. So this area can be highly concentrated compared to the other area. So there's a difference in concentration. Now, difference of concentration means concentration gradient. So magkaiba it era concentration. Itong duduha nga area. One has a greater concentration than the other, or one has a higher concentration than the other area. So that is what we mean by concentration gradient. Please take this down. Again, sumiringan ikita concentration gradient, magkaiba iton era concentration. Iton usa nga area, mas damo iton substances, tapos iton usa nga area, mas guti or waray substance. Uha? Okay. So in passive transport can either be simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or osmosis. Okay, again, passive transport can either be simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or osmosis. Okay, so these are the three passive transport of materials. Simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis do not require energy for the movement of substances or for the movement of molecules. Okay? In simple diffusion, in facilitated diffusion, and osmosis, in all of these three, the molecules move along the concentration gradient, meaning to say, itong substances move from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Kung hainit damo, mapakadtohiya hipguti. Okay, can you get me? Okay. Okay, so we go to the next slide. Okay. So, we go first to the illustration. Now, in the illustration, which has a higher concentration, on top or below? On top or below? Extracellular or intracellular space? Which has a higher concentration? Very good. Okay, very good. Extracellular space. So, kay dinhi damo man itong substances, the substances will move into the intracellular space where where the concentration of substances is lower or lesser. Okay? So, yung substances, pwede, some may pass through the phospholipid bilayer, and some may pass through the protein channels or carrier proteins. So this is a protein channel, while these two are carrier proteins. Okay. Anay ha, kay adi pa na sulod. Kay admit. Okay, so diffusion and osmosis are examples of passive transport. Again, diffusion and osmosis are examples of passive transport. In here, substances don't need or don't require energy for them to be transferred to an area where concentration is less. Okay, so ikang dinhi makadihiya. Ikang dinhi makadi. Okay, so or from, okay. So this is diffusion, while this is osmosis. Now, in the illustration, based on the illustration, how does the two differ? This is an illustration of diffusion, while the other one is an illustration of osmosis. Anong pagkakaiba between the two? Anong pagkakaiba? Yes, Chad?
May nagse-separate direct osmosis, mass
Okay,
organized.
may nagse-separate ko no dito osmosis, meaning may ada niya parang barrier, may ada niya parang barrier where substances pass through. So may ada nakakaulang, whereas in diffusion, waray. Okay? Okay. So we go to facilitated diffusion. In facilitated diffusion, like osmosis and diffusion, it does not require energy. It does not require energy. But it needs a protein that will facilitate the entry or exit of substances. Okay, so the protein here facilitates the entry, the bulig hiya para makasulod itong substances or makaguwa itong substances. Again, the movement of molecules is always from an area where concentration is high to an area where concentration is low. Okay. So these are examples of facilitated diffusion. Here, this protein here, we call it as the carrier protein, just like this. Now, this protein facilitates the entry, or it facilitates the exit. Okay, intracellular na din eh. So it facilitates the exit of this substance, of this molecule. Otherwise, kung waray hini, that is substance cannot go out of the cell. In the other illustration, this carrier protein also helps in the exit of substances. Okay. Okay. So this is facilitated diffusion, as the name implies. There is a substance that facilitates the movement of molecules. Okay. So we go to active transport. The opposite is true in active transport. If the passive transport if passive transport does not require energy, in active transport, energy is needed so that molecules can be transferred from one area to another. So it requires energy for the movement of molecules. The molecules move against the concentration gradient. The molecules move against the concentration gradient. Now here, so against the concentration gradient, anon akong difference an akong pag-define ng concentration gradient kanina, difference of concentration. Okay. Here, pwede liwat hiya, the transfer of materials can move in a concentration gradient, but just like in passive transport, only that energy is needed for molecules to move or for molecules to be transported. Here, examples of active transport are exocytosis, endocytosis, and sodium-potassium pump. Okay, so exocytosis, endocytosis, and sodium-potassium pump. Exo means tipaguwa. Endo means tipasulod. Now, look at the illustration. Okay, so in endocytosis, which is a form of active transport, it is the process by which cells take in substances from outside of the cell by engulfing them in a vesicle. This form of transport is only made possible for big substances or bulk substances. Now, there are two types of endocytosis, phago and pinocytosis. Phago and pinocytosis. Now, in this example, this is an example actually of phagocytosis. Itong bacteria din gin-engulf ang cell. Gin-engulf here. So the cell membrane must change shape and form a vesicle. Tapos dadadon hiya ngadto itong lysosome so that digestive enzymes inside the lysosome will break it down. Sorry. Okay, so this is an example of a phagocytosis. An endocytosis, which is phagocytosis. So, bari nga ni endo, tipasulod. Tipasulod. Kung itong nasulod nga substance is big enough for plasma membrane, big enough to pass through the phospholipid bilayer or big enough to pass through the protein molecules. So itong bubuhaton, the cell membrane will change shape and will form a vesicle. Parang kakauno niya, gi-engulf niya just like this para ini nga substance mahisulod. Okay? So this is endocytosis. Pero kung gugti nga substance, we call it as pinocytosis. Pinocytosis. Okay, so we go to exocytosis. The opposite, the exact opposite of endocytosis. It occurs when a vesicle fuses with the plasma membrane, allowing its contents to be released outside the cell. Okay, look at that. Magawa hiya. So this is how cells excrete waste materials. Nagpapagawa na hiyahin metabolic wastes. These metabolic wastes are enclosed with a vesicle and then fuses with the plasma membrane para hiya release itong cell. Okay, look at that. So magawa na hiya. Okay. Again, endo, tipasulod, exocytosis, tipaguwa. Okay. Now, the release of substances. So in exocytosis, the release of substances needs energy. It needs energy as yung active transport hiya. Okay? So it is only an active transport that requires energy so that molecules are moved from one area to another. Okay, so we go to sodium-potassium pump. The energy requiring process of pumping molecules and ions against a concentration gradient, and it needs a carrier protein. Okay, so ipagkakaiba nira din between if we compare it to facilitated diffusion, kasi in facilitated diffusion, it also needs a carrier protein for the entry and exit of substances. Now, in this sodium-potassium pump, energy is needed for the transport of materials. Masulod ang sodium, magawas ang potassium. Pagsulod niya, pagsulod itong sodium, magawas ang potassium. So the three colored particles here are potassium, tapos while the red ones are the sodium. Pagsulod din sodium, kung taduha nga sodium ito masulod, mapagawa itong cell in 3 potassium molecules. So we call this as the sodium-potassium pump. Okay? When 2 molecules of sodium pass through the carrier protein, it needs energy. Just like in potassium, so the exit of 3 molecules of potassium requires energy also. Okay. Questions before we go to the next topic? Okay, so in the forms of transport, there are 2 forms from which molecules are transported into and out of the cell. One is passive, which does not require energy, while the other one is active, which requires energy. So the 3 examples of passive transport are osmosis, diffusion, and facilitated diffusion. While in active transport, examples are sodium-potassium pump. What else? What else?
Exocytosis.
Exocytosis and
Exocytosis.
Endocytosis.
And endocytosis.
Okay. So are you ready for the next topic? So the next
Yes,
topic
ma'am.
is related to the one that we have just discussed. Nalahain na forms of transport. Okay. So we go to the next topic, the types of transport across cell membrane. Again, this topic is related to our first topic, the forms of transport. So we go to simple diffusion. Okay, so in simple diffusion, the particles move from an area of high to low concentration, as what I've said just a while ago. Particles move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Particles move through any permeable membrane and does not require energy, but by random motion. The best example I think that I can give is when you spray a perfume in one corner of your room, and after a few seconds or a few minutes, the perfume can be smelled in the entire room. That is simple diffusion. Can you give me another example of simple diffusion aside from the one given? Jillian. Na siya nga may nga ni nautot di dahiton room nan after a few minutes nan tatahob kita nga tanan hiton aton irong. That is an example of simple diffusion. Ano, di ba? Okay. So particles move from an area where concentration is high to an area where concentration is low. It is always from many to less, from greater to lesser. Okay, so the particles move through any permeable membrane. Again, Jillian, can you give another example? Gail is raising her hand. Yes, Gail, can you give another example?
Opening the soda or cold drinks.
Opening soda. So where is simple diffusion there when you open a soda?
The CO2 diffuses in the air.
Okay. So the smell of the soda can be as it is can be smelled in the entire room. Okay. Yes, Chad. Chad is raising his hand. Another example, Chad.
The smoke, ma'am. It is smoke. Small dust particles are
Smoke.
diffuses into the air and causes air pollution.
Is water is simple diffusion applicable to a liquid? Kasi kanina air kita. Is it applicable to liquid?
Yes.
What way or how? Mark Kenneth? Applicable ba hiya? Iton simple diffusion, applicable ba ha liquid?
I think
Nasinghari,
no.
yes.
Ma'am, I think no.
Why?
Ma'am, it's all about smell.
Meaning to say, hahangin lahiya pwede.
Opo.
Okay, another answer please. Can we hear from you, Anna? Anna Gia.
I think it can.
Yes, how?
Like when you soak tea bags in a cup of water, and
Yeah.
then eventually the leaves, its aroma or something in it, it spreads throughout the whole liquid, and then eventually it turns into a drink.
Okay, so I got your idea. Yes, it is applicable not only to the air, but to a liquid substance as well. And look at this. When you put, let's take for example an ink on a bottle of in a bottle of water, later on that ink will gradually spread. It will gradually spread until such time that the ink is seen or can be seen all over the liquid in the bottle. Okay, so the illustration, so the ink can be illustrated in this part here, and then it will gradually spread. It will slowly spread until such time that there is an even distribution of substances. Now, diffusion or the movement of substances and simple diffusion will only stop. It will only stop if there is already an even distribution of substances. Kunta inihiya, kunta. Parang hin mag like what Anna said, kunta magbutang ka hin coffee, let's say for example coffee granules, yadahin cup of water or cup of hot water. Tapos later on adalahi hiton but nga ano kay di da mahabot nga iya butangan. Later on the coffee will melt and will gradually spread. The movement of the coffee substances will only stop kung even na an iya concentration. Okay? Okay. So that is simple diffusion. Okay. We go to the next. Okay. Osmosis. Now, is this the first time you hear the word or you come across the word? Yes or no?
Yes.
Osmosis.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
First time.
No, ma'am.
Osmosis.
Yes po.
So, an akon animation kanina, So, di ba, what do you think is this?
Water, ma'am.
What do you think? Water, very good.
Water.
Okay. So, napuno hiyahin water. So, osmosis is actually, so from the illustration, so how do you define osmosis? How do you describe osmosis, or how do you define osmosis in your own words based on the illustration that you have just witnessed? Yes, Jillian, yes?
Is it the movement of water
Yes,
molecules?
the movement of water molecules. So parang may ada pa kulang. Movement of water molecules. Ano pa? Kasi meron lang ani movement of water molecules, it can be diffusion.
With high from a solution with high concentration.
Okay, thank you for that. Meda nagre-raise. Kinikita ako. Ninya, yes, can we hear from you?
Liquid
So, meron nga-
substances.
The flow of liquid substances. Okay, thank you for that. Angelic. So what?
Nag-absorb heat water.
Movement hit on water. Debian.
It is the passive movement of water.
Movement of water. Parang may ada pa kulang. Sige daw, may ada pa kulang. Ana.
The transfer
kulang
fluid.
dida? The transfer fluid.
between
Jillian.
molecules.
It's the movement of water molecules from a high concentration to a lower concentration.
Okay, parang diffusion lang. Gail? Do you want to add something?
It's the movement of water molecules through a semi-permeable membrane.
And the answer is correct. The movement of water molecules passing through a membrane. That is how we define osmosis. Okay, so meron lang nga ni the movement of water molecules in or along a concentration gradient, that is just diffusion. Pero kung itong movement itong water molecules will pass through a membrane, that is already osmosis. Okay? Okay. Okay. So, osmosis is simply diffusion across a semi-permeable membrane, or diffusion across a selectively permeable membrane. So in here, in osmosis, the water molecules diffuse through a semi-permeable membrane. So kung waray hini nga line, kung waray hini nga membrane, diffusion la iton hiya, simple diffusion. Now, since water molecules pass through a membrane, it is not diffusion anymore, but osmosis. A solvent such as water flows into or out of a cell depending on the concentration of a solute such as salt. So meron nga ni solvent, ano pa ang solvent? Nagtutunaw, gintutunaw. A solvent such as water. A solvent such as water flows into or out of a cell. A solvent nagtutunaw, gintutunaw. Nagtutunaw. So solvent, nagtutunaw. Itong solute naman, gintutunaw. Usually, nagtutunaw is a liquid. Okay? In osmosis, it is water. Okay? Okay, look at that. Leka. Now, which molecules do you think will pass through the semi-permeable membrane? The smaller or the green ones? The smaller molecules or the bigger molecules?
The smaller one.
Smaller one. Smaller moms.
Actually, smaller molecules here are water molecules. Ini nga blue is oxygen. Adi naman hiya nga dudu. Ini nga mga gray, they are hydrogen. So H, 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen. So ini nga blue, oxygen. Adi naman hiya nga gray, hydrogen. So water can easily pass through. It can easily pass through the plasma membrane. Okay, so from high to low concentration. Okay, so we go to the types of solutions in osmosis: the isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic solution. Iso, hypo, hypertonic solution. So there are 3 types of solutions: isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic solution. Okay, so iso, when we say iso, it means equal. Isotonic solution. So it has same concentration of solutes both inside and outside the cell. Same concentration of solutes. Dinhi itong solute is salt. Gintutunaw, di ba? Solute, gintutunaw. So outside the cell or in the extracellular environment, may ada niya 25% salt. Inside the cell has also 25% salt. The amount of water in and out of the cell is equal. So itong solvent liwat, equal hiya in and out of the cell. Now, what could be? Will there be movement of water here? Will there, may ada ba movement itong water?
Waray.
No.
Try. In and out of the cell has equal concentration of solute. 25 hasulod, 25 haguwa. Okay? So 75 itong water hasulod, 75 it water haguwa. So there is an equal concentration of both solvent and solute, meaning there is no net movement of water. Diri hiya masulod, itubig, diri liwat hiya maguwa, because inside the cell and outside the cell has an equal concentration. So in this case, the cell is in isotonic environment. The cell is in isotonic environment, meaning parihas itong concentration inside and outside the cell. Okay? The cell is in equilibrium, meaning pareho ang concentration and substances in and out of the cell. We go to hypotonic solution. Higher concentration of solutes inside than outside the cell. Okay, so in
Excuse me,
hypotonic, yes.
Magre-reconnect po ko no Chad. Bakit accept
Okay.
ko no?
Ato na. Okay, so in hypotonic solution, there is higher concentration of solutes inside than outside the cell. Higher concentration of solute, meaning mas damo iton salt hasulod kesa hagwa. Okay? There is a higher concentration of salt inside than outside the cell. Kay mas damo man ang concentration ng salt hasulod, what will be the movement of water? Masulod ba hiya or maguwa?
Masulod.
Solid.
Masulod hiya. Okay, masulod hiya. Okay? So, again, the movement is always from high to low. So, damo ha gawas itong tubig, masulod hiya to melt the salt. Okay? Okay. So, again, the movement is always from high to low. The movement of water is always from high to low. So, damo hagawas ang tubig, so masulod hiya itong cell. Okay. So, when there is a higher concentration of salt, for example, itong solute din itong solute is the salt. So, if there is a higher concentration of solute inside the cell is in hypotonic environment. Okay? And the movement of water is towards the cell. Okay? Were you able to get it?
Yes, ma'am.
Kanina, kanina, inside and outside the cell has an equal concentration of solute. So inside is 25% salt and outside is 25% salt. Kay parehas man in concentration, there is no net movement of water. In this case, the cell is an isotonic environment. Now, when we say hypotonic, the cell has a higher concentration of solute than outside. Didi, 35 unsalt, hagua 15% unsalt. So the tendency of the water is to get into the cell. Okay? So when there is a higher concentration of solute inside the cell than outside, then the cell is in hypotonic environment. Okay. Okay, so we go to hypertonic solution. Hypertonic solution. Here, this is the opposite of hypotonic solution, wherein more solutes are found outside than inside the cell. Mas damo ang solute hagawas kesa hasulod. What will be the movement of water? Into or out of the cell?
Out of the cell.
Out of the cell.
Good.
Cell.
Maguwa hiya. Maguwa hiya. Hagawas kasi damo ang solute. So damo nga ang solute hagawas, meaning damo ang iya tutunawon hagawas. So the tendency of the water is to go out of the cell. Water will go out of the cell. Natunaw naman niya din kay guti la. So damo ang water, guti lang salt. So kaya niya tunawon. So didihas gawas, damo ang salt, guti lang water. So the tendency of the water inside the cell is to go out of the cell. Now in case like this, cell is said to be in hypertonic environment. Okay. Okay, so we go to the effects of osmosis on cells in different tonic environments. Hypertonic. In hypertonic, ano pa daw hypertonic? Ada na inti katurog na.
More solute.
Higher concentration of solute
Solute
outside the cell.
In hypertonic,
inside.
magawa, masulod it tubig.
Magawa.
In hypertonic solution, let's say for example, so the cell is in hypertonic environment. So here, water will go out of the cell. So kung padayon iton water magginuwa di dahiton cell, the cell will shrink. It will shrink. In the case of plant cells, punta, summer, mamaraan, tuna. So the soil is so dry. Ang damo nga tubig nakadiha plant cells. Okay. Since there is a difference in concentration inside and outside the cell, now the tendency of the water inside the plant cell is to go out of the cell. So when water inside the cell, inside the plant cell, will keep on going out of the cell, it may nanabo, the cell, the plant cell will become plasmolized. Makupos hiya. So what happens is, the leaves of plant will wither, malayong. Okay? Nakanotice ka mo? Summer nga ni, nga dirigin bibisigan itong tanom, nalayong itong tanom. Nakanotice ka mo?
Opo.
Perhaps you know the reason why. Okay, what could be the reason? What could be the reason? Kaya ano nga nalayong itong tanom? Kaya ano nga naplasmolize itong plant cells?
Kulang
Tubig na absorb.
much of water.
Nahinga nga in itong tubig. Nahinga nga in itong tubig.
Gawas.
Okay, nakadihiya hiton soil. Kay ano, gawas hiton plant, kulang hintubig. Kulang hintubig. Now, the movement of water here is always from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So magawa siya kay ano, guti ang tubig hagawas. Damo hasulod ha cell, so the tendency of the water is to go out of the plant cell, causing the plant cell to shrink, causing the plant cell to become plasmolized. The result is withered leaves. Nalayong iton dahon itong tanom. Ipadayon nga iton nga pag tinaguwa itong tubig, later on the plant will die because the plant cells will run out of water. Nakuha. Okay? Okay, so we go to isotonic. So here, mga blood cells equal on concentration and solute in and out of the cell. Will there will be a movement of water in and out of the cell?
No.
Will there will be movement? No. So because the cell is in equilibrium, equal and iya concentration inside and outside of the cell. Okay, so in the case of plant cells, when there is an equal concentration of water inside and outside the cell, the plant cell is said to be flaccid. Okay. We go to hypertonic solution. hypertonic. So, this is, ano ba ini? So, this is not hypertonic but hypo. Hypo ha, hypotonic. Hypo. Hypo ha, please make the necessary correction. So, this is hypotonic. In hypotonic solution, what is the movement of water? Into or out of the cell?
Into the
Cell.
Into the cell. The reason could be there is more solute inside than outside. Mas damo itong solute inside than outside the cell. So the tendency of the water is to get into the cell. Masulod hiya. Damo kasi dida ang solute. Damo na tutunawon. So the tendency of the water is to get into the cell. Okay. Now, in animal cells, when the cell is in hypertonic environment, the cell keeps on accepting water molecules. There is a tendency for the cell to burst. Mabudas iton hiya. Kay magpipinasulod la hiya hintubig. Sumabudas iton hiya. There is a tendency for the cell to burst or to lyse, causing the death of the cell. Kay ano? Animal cell membrane la iton aada. Di na nga ni makaya itong cell membrane, iton malubo man iton hiya. So, kung ta ini, anay ma-annotate ako ha. Okay, so normally, kung ta ini hiya, masugad. Normal, kung ta nga sugad. Cell in isotonic solution. Now, when the cell keeps on accepting water molecules, the tendency of the cell is to become bigger. Madako itong hiya. Kay nag-inakseptar yan tubig. Kung matin mag-iininom kitang tubig, nadako ta atong tiyan, napupunuhin tubig, di ba? Okay, now, in animal cells, if they keep on accepting water molecules, there is a big tendency of this cell to burst. Mabudat iton hiya. Malays. Okay? Mabudas iton hiya. Kay ano? Itong cell membrane, di na niya kaya, di na niya kaya pag-hold itong water inside. So the tendency of the cell membrane is to break, to burst. Mag-burst nga itong cell, magkakaguwa na mga organelles what it did that, causing the cell to die. Now, in the case of plant cells, paroya na kunta nga mauran, puno itong ground, puno itong soil, hintubig. Okay. So, in this case, water or plant cell keeps on absorbing water, keeps on accepting water molecules. So, it tendency ni mapupuno itong vacuole. And the cell becomes turgid. Maka-notice ka mo, kung gumawa ka mga iubalay, pagkita niyo't mga tanong, mga tigdong hiya, diyan nala yung, so mga tigdong hiya, magtig-a. It is simply because inside the vacuole is full of water. May ada ba tendency for this cell to burst? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Nalumos. Sugat nga lang, nalumos siya yung tubig. Pero antes siya malumos, kaya pat niya mag-hold hinda mo nga tubig because of the vacuole and because of the cell wall. The cell wall prevents or will prevent the cell from bursting. Pero if the plant cell keeps on absorbing the water molecules, may adalot ito niya tendency pag-burst. Asya nga, ginti tunubigan na nga ni Tindoro, itong tanom nga dire makitubig, nalulumos, namamatay itong tanom. Okay? Okay, so, okay. Ano na ini na endo? Ala, endosmosis movement of water into the cell, which occurs when the cell is placed in solution having a higher concentration of water than the cell. The cells swell up in size after endosmosis. Okay. So this is the tendency of the plant cell as it keeps accepting or absorbing water molecules. Nadako iton hiya. Malubulibat iton hiya, mapupuno in tubig. So it is the vacuole and the cell wall that prevent the bursting of the plant cell. So direct basta-basta ma-burst, unlike in animal cells. Okay. This is the movement of water out of the cell, which occurs when a cell is placed in a solution having a higher concentration of solute than the cell. Higher concentration of solute than the cell. Sa inihiya, napapalibutan hiya in solute. So the tendency of the water is to go out of the cell, causing the cell to shrink. Okay. Okay. Dash revel or dash ring. Normally, as in here, in a normal environment, cell in a normal environment, water will get into the cell will swell, and later on bursts. In plant cell will, water will go out of the cell, causing the cell to be plasmolysed. Here, so here is the cell in a normal environment. Okay, here, cell swells, but is not likely to burst because of the cell wall. And the plant cell becomes turgid. Okay. Okay, so questions? What is the difference again between osmosis and diffusion? Jesslaine?
Could you repeat?
What is the difference between diffusion and osmosis?
Diffusion of
Please turn off, turn on the microphone. Just Lane. Lane to Lola. Okay.
question.
Ano't pagkakaiba between diffusion and osmosis?
Diffusion and osmosis. Diffusion po. H2 across a membrane.
Again?
osmosis po, water molecules diffuse through a semipermeable membrane.
Semi-permeable. Whereas in diffusion,
Semipermeable.
in diffusion,
Simple diffusion po.
diffusion, ano mat diffusion?
Diffusion po.
Ito osmosis, water molecules pass through a semi-permeable membrane. Whereas in diffusion,
diffuses po.
na-diffuse.
It allows,
Na-diffuse.
it allows both solvent and solute molecules, I think.
Ano about the diffusion? So, someone's raising their hand. Cherries. Cherries.
It allows both solvent and molecules, solute molecules to move freely.
Diffusion. Meaning,
Yes. It allows both, and osmosis only allows solvent molecules to move or something.
okay. So, can I call Denise Apura? Okay, Denise.
Yes po, ma'am.
So how does osmosis and diffusion differ?
Simple diffusion particles move from an area of high to low
High to low concentration.
While the osmosis passes through a membrane.
What is the movement? What is the flow of the water molecules? What is the direction of the flow of water molecules in osmosis? Denise. What is the direction of the flow? Denisa Fuentes. What is the direction of the flow of water molecules in osmosis? Is it the same with diffusion, Denise? Letak tatawag ko ulit dire naka-ulit camera. Krishna de los Santos. What is the movement of the flow of substances? What is the movement of the flow of substances? Alison, can we hear from you? Alison?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the direction of the flow of substances in osmosis? Is it the same with diffusion?
Dire po.
Dire. So, ano matira pagkakaiba? Okay. Aliana, ano itong direction itong flow of substances and diffusion? The direction of the flow, ano hiya? From high to low or from low to high concentration?
Ma'am, from high to low.
Very good, from high to low. What about in osmosis, Aliana? What is the direction of the flow of substances? Is it from high to low or from low to high?
From low to high.
Concentration?
From low to high.
Osmosis? Osmosis?
Yes, po, ma'am.
Isabella, do you agree with Aliana?
Yes,
Is
ma'am,
the
I
direction
agree.
of the flow of substances, in osmosis from low concentration to high concentration?
Yes, ma'am, I agree with Aliana.
Wala? Another answer. Mark Kenneth. Mark Kenneth. Is it always, is the direction of the flow of water molecules in osmosis from low to high concentration?
No.
Yes. No.
Ulol.
Mark Kenneth?
No. Not always, ma'am.
Not always. Meaning, may other times nga from low to high, may other times luwat nga from high to low. Siya ba?
Opo.
Okay, now please take this down. Itong direction, itong flow of water in both diffusion and osmosis is the same. It is always from high concentration to low concentration. It is always from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, paras kunta din kung kay ano nga magawa itong tubig in this example, kung kay ano nga magawa itong tubig kay mas damo itong tubig hasulod kesa hagwa. So the tendency of the water is to go out, of the cell. Now in hypotonic solution, didi hasakob mas damo ang concentration ng tubig kesa hasulod. So masulod ang tubig. So the direction of the flow is always from an area where concentration is high to an area where concentration is low. Okay? How does Mary Vincent, are you still there? Vincent, please turn on the camera and turn on the microphone also. Mary Vincent.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so how does hypertonic and hypotonic environment or solutions differ?
Wait lang po, wait lang.
Hypertonic and hypotonic.
Can you repeat the question, please?
How does hypertonic solution differ to hypotonic solution? Anong pagkakaiba between hypotonic and hypertonic?
The difference po in hypotonic and hypertonic, right?
Yes.
Apa. Oh my God. And I'm sorry if this is wrong.
Okay lang magkamali. Iko-correct na lang naton. Okay lang magkamali. Do not be afraid to make a mistake. It is through mistakes that we learn more.
This is only one word. Because of its because it's a solvent.
Now in hypertonic, what is the movement? What is the movement of the water molecule or water molecules in hypertonic?
The movement of hypertonic is mapagawas po hiya.
Hypertonic?
Yes. Kinukulba. Oh my God.
Sige, tawag laan ay kita kan Antoinette. Antoinette Labado. So itong hypertonic, masulod ba or maguwa itong tubig?
Ma'am, in hypertonic, water leaves the cell, and in hypotonic, water enters the cell.
Hala. Ano paki-mute ada marangasap. Okay. Sige, in hypotonic ano pa daw?
Ma'am, in hypotonic,
In hypotonic, water tends to get into or out of the cell.
ma'am, in hypotonic, water enters the cell. In hypertonic, water leaves the cell.
Is the answer correct? Children?
Yes, ma'am.
Correct.
Yes,
ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes
ma'am.
po, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Okay. So asyat an ira pagkakaiba between usa nga pagkakaiba between hypertonic and hypotonic solution. Now, in hypertonic solution, what happens to the cell? What happens if the cell is exposed to a hypertonic environment? What will happen to the cell?
The cell shrink.
The cell will
It
shrink.
will
shrink.
It will shrink or it will
Or
shrivel
plasmolize.
or become plasmolized in case of plant cells. Now, when the cell is exposed to a hypotonic environment, so what will happen to the cell?
The cell will
Burst, causing the death of the cell.
Okay, so the cell will swell. The cell will swell and eventually burst. And later on, dies. Okay, and that's the end of the cell. Okay, so in the case of plant cells, there itong hera basta-basta mabudas because of the cell wall. Tapos may add niya bigger storage of water, and that is the vacuole. Okay? Okay, so I hope you learned something today. Did you learn something? Did you learn something?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Okay. So,
Nakulba laak.
Ma'am.
kenol ba kala? Okay la okay la magsala ha. Okay la magsala. Again, it is through our mistakes that we learn more. Kay nahinunumduman ta iton. So, kung ito niya nga pakiana, igpakianak ko dito iton summative test, sigurado ak hinunumduman mo iton hiya. Diba? Okay, so in the chat box, you write the three new things that you learned today. Right? 3 new things that you learned today. Write it in the chat box, but address it directly to me. Para direct makita it, you answer it iba. Okay, timer starts now. I will give you 3 minutes for this. Timer starts now. I'm now reading your answers. Okay, before I forget, we will have another summative test next meeting. Next meeting will be on Tuesday. Will be on Tuesday afternoon. So before we discuss the new topic on Tuesday, we'll first have a summative test. The coverage will be cellular transport. I'm now reading your answers. Let me ask you, do you visit the Google Classroom, our Google Classroom?
Yes, ma'am. I
Yes,
visit.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you watch the video clips?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, so two.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes po.
Next meeting will be, next discussion will be cell division. We'll be discussing how the cell divides, how the cell multiplies. PowerPoint lessons will be uploaded to the Google Classroom as well as the video clips in the Google Classroom also. I will also be posting the PowerPoint lessons in the group chat. Section Santol, I am encouraging you to join the Google Classroom. Parang 29 pala ada ka mo. In Mango, you are already 35. So there are still more than 5 or less than 10 that have not yet joined the Google Classroom. Itong Santol, medyo damo pa ano rin mag-join. So I am encouraging you to join the Google Classroom. Okay, so thank you for your answers. I was able to read all your answers. Thank you for that. Thank you that you are learning from me. Thank you for that. So be ready for the summative test next meeting. Again, the coverage is cellular transport. I will also include the cell membrane in the summative test. Okay, goodbye and thank you for bearing with me. Na-late kasi ako naghangan akon ano pa daw computer. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you po,
Bye-bye.
ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Please turn on the camera first. Please turn on the camera for the attendance because this attendance is sent to our department head. Page 1 laan na kita ha. Okay. Smile. We go to the next page.
Bugard.
Next page. Next page. 1, 2, 3. Smile.
Ay.
Go to the third page. Third page. Turn on the camera. 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, so thank you, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Bye po.
Bye-bye.